Come on. We live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, and welcome to the Edge of Everyday. Are you standing at your own edge? Are you craving deeper conversations? Do you know there's more waiting for you just beyond your comfort zone? If you answered yes to any of those questions, the Edge of Everyday is the place for you. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and tough talk about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. You know, the ones between fear and courage, grief and joy, ambition and vulnerability, change and becoming. Here, we explore contradiction. Here, we hold paradox. We confront the truths we've been taught to ignore. Real talk with real people that spark provocative invitations to leap out of what's safe. The Edge is where you come alive. The Edge of Everyday. Thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. I'm Sandra Bargman, and welcome back to The Edge of Everyday. Is your personal brand or message revealing who you are, or is it hiding who you are? Why do some leaders inspire trust, while others, with all the right credentials, leave us cold? Have we mistaken visibility for authenticity? And if marketing, something so many of us resist, isn't really about selling at all, but about helping people recognize themselves in a story that speaks to their hopes, to their fears, and to their longings? Today, we're talking about story. That's story with a capital S. Not simply storytelling as a communication skill, but story as the invisible thread that shapes our identities, our relationships, our businesses, and the way we move through the world. We are live in the hive with Paul Furiga, founder of Capital S Story. For decades, Paul has helped leaders, organizations, and entrepreneurs discover that beneath every successful message is something far more profound, a story that reveals not only what we do, but why it matters. We're asking whether marketing can be an act of service instead of manipulation, whether authenticity is something we perform or something we uncover, and whether changing the story we tell ourselves might be the most revolutionary act of all. I'm really excited for this conversation, but before we dive in, let me share Paul's bio. Paul Furiga is the chief storyteller at Vendilli and is a best-selling author. 2 decades in journalism, writing 10,000 stories and editing another 10,000, shaped his storytelling skills. After covering everything from murders to the White House, Paul entered the agency world as a vice president at Ketchum Public Relations, the world's 5th largest PR firm, where he advised Alcoa, Firestone, Delta Airlines, and Rutgers University, among many other well-known clients. Paul's curiosity about the why behind every organization's story and his passion to share these stories led him to found WordWrite in 2002 and to write Finding Your Capital S Story, Why Your Story Drives Your Brand, available on Amazon. In 2025, Paul and his team and clients joined Vendilli, creating a full-service agency that serves clients from story to strategy to SEO to websites and full digital marketing. Paul is the host of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power of the capital S story, the story above all others that answers why someone should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. Welcome, Paul.
Why, thank you, Sandra. It's an honor to share the podcasting space with you and for those watching or listening, surely you don't know, but Sandra was just on Storylines Live, and our episode uh, went live just a couple hours before we sat down to record this episode. So, hooray!
Yay! Yes, we
So,
had such a fantastic
we
time
did.
together on
We
your
did.
podcast. And I immediately invited Paul onto mine. And that's how it can go sometimes.
It's
And
like like neighbors, inviting each other over or something.
yeah, breaking some bread together, telling some stories together. That's why we're here. But
Exactly.
but another thing that I have to tell everyone that I just loved, I discovered in doing just a little research for going on to Paul's show that he lives in Pittsburgh, my hometown. Oh my God.
That's well done.
Hey, I'm
Ian's
really
got
good
that
at this.
accent down in
I
there.
totally have this accent down in that. Okay, oh my
Ian's
God.
gonna come over right up the couch and we'll sit down.
Oh my God, we'll sit
Maybe we'll
down in
go up the
that.
street and that.
Yes, you can imagine, I when I went to conservatory at Carnegie Mellon, I had a slight accent because I wasn't originally from Pittsburgh. I moved
Right.
there, my parents were, and I moved there when I
Right.
was 10. So I didn't really have an enormous Pittsburgh accent by the time I got to conservatory. But I did have some of the phrases, like I said, read up and things. But I had just enough that it needed to be cut out of my
That's right.
speaking patterns.
Modify your
But
speech patterns.
oh my God, did we all have fun in all the dramats have fun speaking Pittsburghese. And I have friends from Pittsburgh that I worked with in theater when I was a 18-year-old that we can't get on the phone without doing Pittsburghese to this
That's
day.
fun. That's fun. I
It is
like
fun.
that.
It is
Where's
fun.
where's Henry Higgins and Eliza Doolittle when you need them, right? They should have done
Right.
that whole thing in Pittsburgh.
Oh, that would have taken it up a notch. Absolutely, because not everyone can do it. It's very unique. But we digress, friends. This is how much I love Pittsburghese and Pittsburgh. So thank you for indulging me, listeners. So let's just dive in with my first question, my friend. What
Okay.
identity do you lead with?
What identity do I lead with? Well, you'll be absolutely positively shocked that I describe myself as a storyteller. I mean, who would have thought?
Who would have thought? So you lead with that in all that you
Yes.
do. I love
Yeah,
that.
pretty much I do. I mean, whether it's my personal or professional life, um, some people who don't understand the power of storytelling will say, what's so important about that? That's like breathing. Or as the late Indiana basketball coach who was famed for his opinions and temper, Bobby Knight, once said, most of us learn to write in fourth grade and we move on to better things. Um,
Mm,
but the truth of the matter is, storytelling is an innate human skill. And in my life, it's been woven through pretty much everything I do.
yeah, I love that. It is. It's encoded in us, and
Mhm.
it just is encoded in our human DNA. So I love that your identity is storytelling, and so I had to begin with, this relationship of identity with storytelling. What are your thoughts on that? I don't know that everyone would make the assumption or the connection of identity with storytelling. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, you'll be shocked again. I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll keep them brief and then you can ask questions. Um, I often say, Sandra, that when the first person who started a fire on purpose told the second person about it, it was probably through a story, probably involving barbecued meat. So, you know, that's how elemental storytelling is to the human condition. In primitive pre-literate societies, folks, that means societies where people couldn't read or write. There was actually, in many tribal societies, a storyteller role. And the storyteller was one of the most important people in the culture. Sometimes these storytellers had a talking stick, and some of the audience might be familiar with a talking stick. Usually, in modern day times, the talking stick is the tool that's used when you have, a gaggle of 10-year-old kids and you only want one of them to talk at a time. They hold the talking stick. But in these pre-literate societies, the talking stick was actually the record of the culture's history. And there would be hieroglyphics and other things on this talking stick that the storyteller would use. So when it was time for a battle, there was a story for that. When it was time for a wedding, there was a story for that. So storytelling goes way, 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 way back. And of course, even if you haven't seen them firsthand, most of us are familiar with the idea of cave paintings, which are stories in and of themselves. So that's how elemental it is to the human
Truly.
condition. We've lost touch in the 21st century with text messaging and social media. You said in your intro, we've lost the thread of the importance of storytelling.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And which is why I personally think that storytelling is the scaffolding for identity,
Oh,
and the story that we tell about ourselves. There's the story you share out in the world, whether
yes,
that's true or manufactured or performative or authentic,
yes.
and the internal narrative that you tell yourself that maybe is true, maybe isn't. Maybe it's something that you've gotten from your tribe or the group
Your
that you grow
family,
up in, your
whoever.
family,
Yes.
your culture.
Mhm. 100%.
We here in the United States have two very separate stories that motivate two very different identities that
At
we're
least
seeing
two.
playing out. Well, two extremes, yes, at least two
Yeah. Yeah.
extremes in on our political landscape. And
Absolutely.
the identity that's associated with those stories, it's pretty powerful. And having to come together with one story that really unites a collective identity, I think
Right.
is really extraordinarily important. So
Yeah.
tell me, oh, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to move on to something else, but
You
if
go right
you,
ahead. Pretty
all right,
soon,
you.
audience, pretty soon we're going to be finishing each other's sentences. So just don't worry about it.
It's a storytelling love affair.
It is.
Have you ever worked with someone who realized that they had been living someone else's story to this identity thing? Have you worked with someone on their story that felt,
Um,
yeah, I'm sure, of course.
yeah.
Can you tell us an example
So,
or overall thoughts on
yeah,
that?
the most common example that I've seen as a professional, and then I think all of us see, is the same story being told over and over again by different people. Let's say in marketing, right? And what that does is it creates a polenta of thinking. And what I mean by that is, I'm not a great cook, but I know what polenta is. And one of polenta's benefits is you can mix it with anything, and it becomes this bland concoction that doesn't overpower anything. And so the way that companies and people use somebody else's story is to water down the uniqueness of their own story, right? So at our firm, we work with a lot of founders and founder-led companies. Generally speaking, people who get up in the morning and say to themselves one day, you know what? I have a better idea. I'm going to start my own company. They have this thing called passion, and they are very well connected with a story of their own. And somewhere along the way, too many of them lose that connection and they start thinking to themselves, oh, I like my competitor's story better. I need to tell that story. Or, as the example you gave, Sandra, on a personal level, people have passions to do particular things. I don't know, play music or something. And, their parents or somebody else tells them, no, that's not an acceptable thing to do. And so they think they need to wear a man's clothes or woman's clothes, and they wind up uh, appearing to the world sharing another story. The problem with that is success in sharing a story starts first and foremost with authenticity. So if you're not sharing your authentic story, personally or professionally, sooner or later, an astute audience, and listen, aren't all of us skeptics today
Oh, yeah,
of everything? We're
yeah.
going to know that's not an authentic story, and it will reduce, water down, maybe even destroy your credibility. Who wants
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and listen, I know the word authentic is thrown around a lot. I use it a
Mhm.
lot. It's thrown around, but honestly, there's no better word for the truthful, raw, real story, the authentic story.
Mhm.
So
Can I define that for you before we move on?
please.
Okay. So as we define authentic, it means rooted in truth. Let me give you an
Mhm.
example. Let's say you and I are in the same geographic location and we decide to go to lunch. You cross the intersection and I don't. All of a sudden, there's an accident in the middle of the intersection. You're on one side, I'm on the other side. We both saw the same accident, but your viewpoint is different than mine. Are you the truth teller and I'm the liar if the cops come by, or vice versa? Well, authentic in that instance means that we need to understand different people in different organizations are going to have different viewpoints on the same incident, event, movement, whatever. As long as their view is rooted in an authentic truth, that's a legitimate story.
Absolutely.
Think of a large family, right? I come four kids in my family. My youngest sister, her view of what the family was like when she was the last kid at home is different than mine. I was the
Yeah,
oldest. That's her story.
of
It's
course.
authentic and it's rooted in truth, right? And it's the same way in business and pretty much every human endeavor.
I would absolutely agree with that. 100%. So you let's move into marketing. You talk
Yes.
as someone who teaches storytelling, I think of storytelling as being a very transformative and mystical practice
Yes.
of self-knowledge, which I talked about on your show. Marketing, on the other hand, and I don't know that this is across the board because I'm not in marketing, but I'll speak
Mhm.
for, the average person who
Yeah.
understands maybe more than a little bit about marketing. There's a resistance to it. It has a reputation for being transactional.
Yes.
Um, so how has marketing evolved in the time that you've been involved in it, and how has the role of storytelling
Mhm.
played a role in that evolution?
Mhm. Well, that's a great question. Uh, I'll give you two examples that explain why I think we have this problem. It's a real problem. Number one, the amount of information that's available to us is just ridiculous. A few years ago, a stat that was popular, um, a person in the Middle Ages, their entire life learned less than in one day's edition of the New York Times. There was a research study on that. So if you just think
Mind
about
blowing.
that, okay, that is mind blowing. Now let's add in social media and
Mm-hmm.
broadcast television and texting and whatever other flavor of bombardment. More recent studies suggest that the average 21st century human being with access to the internet is subjected to between 4,000 and 10,000 distinct messages a day. How are we to make sense of that? My experience suggests that in this environment, stories have become more important than ever. That doesn't mean that all of those inputs are good stories. A lot of them are trash. I mean, I can get on my phone right now and find out what the weather is in Copenhagen. Do I need to know that right now? No, I don't. But how am I going to make sense of what I do need to know? And the answer is story. I'm going to give you a quick example of this. A few years ago, at one of the Ivies, I forget which one, it could have been Yale or Harvard, there was a study done on this issue of overload. And the scientists had this brilliant idea that the brain essentially has two hemispheres. Supposedly, one side of it's creative and the other side of it's rational. So, their hypothesis was that the overload was on the logic or rational side of the brain. So, as a control, they wired up all of their test subjects with electrodes on the creative, not rational part of the brain because they figured nothing was going to happen there. And they were intensely looking at the other side of the brain. When they ran the study, they discovered that as the information was taken in by the test subjects, it went from the narrative side of the brain to the creative side of the brain and then back.
Mm.
When they asked the test subjects what was happening, the answer that came through loud and clear was this: in order to make sense of the information that was coming in, I had to process it in the form of a story I could understand.
Mm. Yeah.
What greater evidence do we need that even in today's environment, whether it's marketing or any other form of human communication, stories are essential to how we understand the way the world works, whether it's for us personally or on broader levels.
Really. So marketing is a way of inviting people into story. Is
Absolutely.
that's the evolution. So how does story in your work become a
Mhm.
marketing message without losing its soul, if you will, without losing its
Mhm.
the mystical quality, the transformational quality? How do you utilize it? And maybe this is a good transition question into what is your, what is the big S story, and
Mhm.
how does that play into your process? Share that process.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sandra. So think about what we just talked about, the bombardment of messages that, as you pointed out, aren't really stories at all, and it's just a bunch of
No,
garbage, right?
trying to be story.
Trying to be story, but those aren't stories.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to that restaurant at lunch. I don't know your town. You say, I want to try a new restaurant. Okay, great. What are we going to do? We're going to consider recommendations from friends, or we're going to look at a review site. Anything we need, from a dentist to fix a toothache to an attorney to handle a lawsuit for us, we want to know, who are these people? What's the measure of who they are? Oh, that's the company that, and the answer after that is the story. Now, every company, every person, every organization has a story that some collective group has about them. Don't we want that story to be the story that we know to be our authentic story? That's the capital S story. We say in our work, the capitalist story stands above all the rest because it answers those four fundamental questions. Why would somebody buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you, right? It defines the character and the nature of an organization. Beyond, are you cheapest, or are your products long lasting, or any other measure, this is what
The
your
values driven,
stakeholders,
yes.
yeah, there's like, what kind of companies? They're cheapskates.
Right.
Their products always break, right? So there's a lot of science behind this. Certainly, it's cultural in the sense of, um, the theater, films, music. Uh, the mystical part of it is actually science. Why do people spend millions of dollars to see 40 iterations of the same Marvel Comics universe movie? They know how it's going to end. They know what the characters are because our brain craves stories. We love stories. That's the mystical part. The work of Carl Jung during the First World War in Switzerland demonstrated what he called the collective unconscious, that human beings, regardless of their language, where they were born, their economic attainment, their profession, our brains are hardwired for the same elemental stories. That's why we love those crazy movies. I'll watch them. That's fun entertainment. But that's also how we take the measure of every other important organization or person or movement or thought in our lives. We are trying to understand and process this enormously complex, very old world through narrative, through story.
Yeah. And in general, the marketing world has moved away from product pushing to
Yes.
company story.
Yes.
and or even individual story that sort of heads the company, or the company itself is the individual story.
Yes. So if you think about the capital S story, uh, think of it like a book, okay? So my company is a book. The book is about that's your capital S story. But
Mhm.
you're going to take your audience, whatever the audience is, on a journey.
Yeah,
So
totally.
the iteration of the story in chapter one, two, three, four, whatever, is going to be variations on that.
Mm.
Our work is not only based upon the work of Carl Jung, but also the mythologist Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell's famous for writing the book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, in which he came up with what he called the hero's journey,
Journey.
which is the classic story, with the rising action, the climax, the hero uh,
Crisis, yeah, the
crisis.
resolution.
I, George Lucas, when he did Star Wars, sat down with Joseph Campbell and said, I want to do a 9-part film series based on the Greek tragedy model, where you start the story in the middle and then you go back and then you go back to the end. And there's a
Yeah.
whole process to that. And Lucas relied on Campbell and his understanding of the hero's journey to construct initially the story of Luke Skywalker, and later on throughout the franchise, that's been carried through. That's how our brains work. We love those stories. It's how we make sense of these things, right? And so, in marketing, the best success comes from sharing your authentic story, having fluent storytellers share it, and then critically, if you're a business, well, really a nonprofit too, you want to know that your audience is engaged. And in the 21st century in marketing, we have all kinds of measures and things that we can do, metrics to assess whether or not the audience is engaged, right? But this is a critical thing, no matter what kind of story you're telling. Broadway shows that close in a week, they failed on engaging the audience. Musicians who never have a hit record and disappear into obscurity, same thing, right? But in the marketing realm, that's a critical component. The authentic story, having the right people sharing that story, and then making sure that you're keeping the audience engaged. And so, just a couple examples. Nike, generations of history, a real story that's carried through even to today. Apple Computer, same thing.
Oh yeah,
Been carried
full
through,
on.
right?
Yeah.
Fantastic storytellers. I used to say this was also true of Southwest Airlines, but I feel that recently they've lost their way. So
Mm.
there's probably a blog or something in that for me when I get time to. But
Yes,
yeah.
I would
So
agree
those
with
are
that. They have, well, many of the smaller ones have lost their way. So when what's your process with working with a client?
right.
Share that with us.
So
I know
what
you have 3 pillars, and I love that.
yeah, and that's part of it. The key part of it is what's known as archetypal stories. If you and I were talking over that lunch that I mentioned earlier, and you said, "So Paul, what's new with you?" And I said, "Well, we got a great new tech client." And then I gave you the verbal version of reading a slide with 15 bullets on it with a bunch of technical gobbledygook. You saw somebody later on, they'd say, what did Paul say at lunch? We got a new client, but I can't tell you what the client is. But if I said to you, Sandra, we have a new tech client, it's a David and Goliath story.
Yeah.
You know what? You do
Yeah.
not have to be a biblical scholar to know
But
that
jump right in.
underdog. So that's an archetypal story. And so in our
Yeah.
work, what we're doing is we're interviewing principals in the company, customers or clients if we can. We're looking at competitors. We need to understand what is the raw material that constitutes the organization's story. And then
Love
we're
this.
aligning those specifics with archetypal narratives. Now, the best stories combine two or three of the most common 12 archetypal families. And I think in your experience, Sandra, and all the work you've done in the arts, you'll understand this right away. But for the audience, we're talking about the ruler, the sage, the explorer, the jester, the
Yeah.
caregiver. There's
Oh, yeah.
12 of these archetypal families that describe how an organization or an individual behaves and what story form they most naturally inhabit. And so when we're working with companies, think of healthcare. We worked with a company one time that did billing for ambulances. For them to say they're the caregiver archetypal story is not enough because wouldn't a brain surgeon say the same thing, right? So the combination is what makes the difference. You'll have a primary archetypal story and a secondary, maybe and a tertiary, and it's the weaving together of those that's the magic. What you ultimately want to do is create a version of your story that is three things: unique, compelling, and memorable. So if you go back to what we talked about several minutes ago, somebody says, what do you know about this Vindili company? Oh, they are, says the person who's never worked with Vindili, but knows the story. Well, that's what we want. That's the measure of success. We want to create an awareness and action, moving of hearts and minds, and getting people to engage with an organization based upon their understanding of and their like for that story. I want to work with that kind of company. That's the kind of attorney I want to hire,
Yeah.
right?
That overarching premise of who the company is. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and I love the use of the archetypes. And and companies can shift. Their archetypes can shift. And the characters within that story, their archetypes can shift. And it really, yeah, the job of the storytelling is to always be on top of it. And particularly when something, when your company has shifted or grown
Yes.
and you need to rewrite that story in a really provocative, interesting, unique way, that the archetypes
So
indeed
true.
have shifted.
So true. What I often say is your story will evolve
Mm,
if your organization is successful. The classic example
exactly.
I have, back to what we talked about several minutes ago, a founder starts the company. Now, he may sell it, or a son or daughter may take over.
Mm,
Back to the book idea. Chapter one was the founding and the founder. Chapter two, we introduced different characters and the archetype shifts because
yes.
we've got new people running the company. And that's, I think, in terms of marketing success and business success, where a lot of companies lose that thread again because you can't tell the same story or a version of that story that you had when you started if you become a really big company.
Yeah.
You can evolve that story, but to tell the exact same story when you're not who you used to be, that's not going to work.
Well, that's a great seg into this question in performance versus telling the truth, the performing of the authenticity
Yes.
versus the real telling of the truth. Can you tell when someone has moved from performing their story into truth telling? Give us an example of that, perhaps someone you've worked with.
Right. So the basic concept here is that old truism of you can't just talk the talk, you need to walk the walk, right? So a few years ago, we were working with an organization, a law firm actually, and the founders of the firm were animal lovers. And so they wanted to, say that they were animal lovers. Well, that's
Hmm.
fine. How are you going to live your story? So they started to do pro bono legal work for no-kill animal shelters. Okay, that's being authentic and walking the walk. Lots of people love dogs. How many people are willing to apply whatever professional skill they have in order to extend themselves in that way?
And make it a profound part of their story.
Exactly. That
Yeah.
is such a credibility builder. So much
Mm.
of what companies say about themselves in a marketing sense is just foo-foo pablum garbage. It has no connection to reality. And that's what we're looking for when you talk about truth telling, that connection to walking the walk.
Yeah. Can you share a success story? I love that you asked me this, and that's why I'm asking you this question. A success story of a client where you watched them move from hiding behind a polished narrative into a really dynamic, authentic story about themselves or about their company or a combination thereof.
So a few years ago, we worked with a law firm and we identified that their primary archetypal story was that of the navigator. So their ideal client was a small to mid-sized business that either had a small legal department or no legal department internally. So that if they had a legal need, they were going to be the first phone call.
Mm.
So if you're going to find yourself in a situation in business or life that you've never been in before, you need a navigator. You want somebody who's been there before. And so we're working with the senior partners at this firm to develop this story. And one of the partners says, I got you right there. He's like, I love maps. I am an amateur cartographer. And then he started reeling off these things he says to clients to talk about how he's going to make sure they don't wind up in the potholes and get lost in the woods. And I think to myself, oh my God, we did a great job of interviewing everybody and making sure we were working on the right flavor of story, but also here's somebody who's validating what we discovered by adding to what we've shared, right? So that would be an example that I think is a great success story.
Mhm. So, but it's a wonderful success story. But can you also share something where you kind of nailed somebody from doing a performative, authentic story to someone who shifted into like they got it
You
that
you want
they
me to tell you about somebody who didn't listen to me?
yeah, that yeah, that's what we come on. Spill the tea. Well, I mean, just
Well,
the understand because I think a lot of people are going to see themselves in this.
yeah.
They cling to these performative narratives because they think that this is the way to be in as a business person, and they're absolutely petrified about being vulnerable about themselves. So to
Uh,
see the switch is so potent to me.
So a lot of our work is actually in crisis communications, and it's from that arena
Oh.
that I see most of these situations evolve. I mentioned a few minutes ago, don't step on the landmine. Um, you can tell some people not to step on the landmine, but sometimes they do. And one of the worst ways to do that is based upon our experience as expert storytellers, if we know that a narrative is not going to work for a certain kind of organization, but you insist on using it anyway, and this comes back to where we started in the episode, wearing another person's clothes, right?
Yeah.
Well, my competitors say this, so I'm going to say that. Well, here's the deal. Your competitors can back that up, but you can't, right? So I've had a few of those situations in a crisis. And here's what happens. We have this concept. We call it the bank of goodwill. Now, in really large companies, this just blows me away, but anybody who thinks accounting is 100% tight as a science is wrong because a company like, oh, I don't know, Johnson and Johnson carries a line item on their financial balance sheet called goodwill. And that is the intangible, amorphous, squishy, what is your brand worth in the eyes of your consumers?
Mm.
Well, if you have a company and you share an inauthentic story, you are drawing down on the bank of the goodwill but hard, and you might find yourself in deficit. And we've had that happen with some companies. We worked with a company a few years ago who had spent zero time on sharing their story. In fact, they were proud of it. When I had the first meeting with the CEO, a very large construction company, they do hundreds of millions of dollars on each individual project, very complex stuff. And he said, I'm so proud of this company. We're such a B2B company. You can't even find us on the internet. And then they set a bridge on fire in a major downtown city. And within 24 hours, there were 500 plus negative mentions of that company. So by failing to share their story and giving the public a sense, bad things happen to good companies, just like the
Mhm.
book, Bad Things Happen to Good People, right? So if something bad happens to your favorite airline or, your favorite coffee shop, you're like, oh, well, I'm not happy about this, but I've been there 250,000 times and I know they're good people. Well, when you haven't done that work to share your story, all people are going to have to go on is the negative. So that, I guess, would be probably the worst example.
Mm, that's powerful. Yeah, no presence, no storytelling at all. That's wow. Okay, so I'm looking at the time and I'm really curious. We're going to switch gears, folks. Now that we've gotten all of the sage storytelling from our guest Paul, I'm going
Uh,
to switch gears to some wilder stuff. Back in your journalistic days, you interviewed Alice Cooper.
oh, I did, yeah.
Let's hear about that.
Well, you have to understand, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So I was a
Oh,
teenager
come on. He's
at the
not old
time
at all.
that I did that. It was fun. There used to be this thing um, before Sirius XM and Spotify called radio stations.
Yeah.
You
Oh, yeah,
remember
those
those? And I grew up
those
in
dust-tailed
Cleveland.
things.
Yeah,
You grew, that's right. You grew
we
up
had
in
a
Cleveland.
fantastic radio station in Cleveland, WMMS, the Buzzard, and they would bring in high school journalists to interview musicians. And so the high point was interviewing Alice Cooper. The low point was probably Captain and Tennille. So some people may remember
Oh,
them.
ouch. I loved Captain and Tennille.
Well, they're actually great musicians, but if I would have
Maybe
told
not a
you
great interview.
it was Karen Carpenter, it might have been a little bit different. But yeah,
Uh,
but I mean, in a long journalistic career, I've interviewed presidents and Shirley Temple Black, and people like that, and lots of
absolutely.
senators and other people like that. So,
Really
um,
cut your teeth on storytelling in
oh, I
so
mean,
many ways. Yeah.
but I literally did count the stories. When I am old, and so in the old days, we used to have this thing in the newspapers called the morgue. That's where all the stories went to die. Now, the people who worked in the morgue didn't like you calling it the morgue. They preferred it to be called the library. But before the internet, what would happen is they get a bunch of copies of the newspaper and they would cut out all the stories and paste them down in books, like some advanced version of, kindergarten child play. And then when you were going to write a story on somebody like Sandra, you went down to the library or the morgue, and they had these things all filed in a huge filing system, and you'd get this little book with all the stories in it. And when the Cincinnati Enquirer digitized the library, they sent me all the books for all the stories I'd written, which I
Oh,
deeply appreciated. So I counted those. And then, I spent a number of years in Washington, D.C., working for what is the newspaper division of Thomson Reuters. And every week we had to send the CEO a report of how many stories we wrote.
wow.
So I was able to count those stories, and then there's other
Mhm.
stories along the way. And then when I became an editor, I was able to tell how many stories I edited doing that. So anyway, when you do that, you're with people in the best of times and the worst of times. You really come to understand what it takes to move people's hearts and minds and inspire that action I was
Yeah,
talking about. It's phenomenal training. I wouldn't trade it
indeed.
for the world.
Indeed. Well, and my last question to interviewing musicians, you have a band.
Yes, for the last several years, I have been a member of the Altered Egos, which has
Love this
been
name.
pretty popular. Yeah, we're not really rock stars, so that's our alter ego. And over the 3.5 years I played with them, probably played 125 shows,
Oh,
40 shows
fabulous.
alone, and in 2025 we recorded an album.
Fantastic. What kind of music?
It's rock music.
Okay.
So in terms of our covers, we'll do everything from the 70s to today,
Okay.
everything from Journey to Adele or Led Zeppelin. And then
Love it. Anybody writing their own?
oh yeah, the album is all originals.
Oh,
It's called
cool.
Making It the Hard Way. That's the title track. And I have a song in there called Amy's Ink.
Hmm. I think I need to get a copy of this, Paul.
Grab it on any streaming
All
platform.
right.
I'd love
All
it.
right. That is so fantastic. And songwriting is such extraordinary mythological storytelling.
It
And
absolutely is.
oh my, just one more way of sharing our stories in the world. And as somebody who has written music and sang her entire life, I so love that that's also a part of your storytelling journey.
Yeah, one thing for the audience that I is fundamentally important to me. I think every single human being is creative.
Totally.
Unfortunately, by the age of 5, it's been beaten out of us.
I would concur completely.
Yeah. So, whatever, if you're watching or listening, whatever you do to pay the bills, if that's your art and that's your creativity, two thumbs up for you. But if it's not, find it, connect with it. You know, I've written the one book. I've got 3 novels that I've outlined. I've got another couple of nonfiction books. I've got the band going. I think this is whatever we do for a paycheck can't fully represent, if you will, our story as an individual person. And these other outlets are what make the picture complete. And Sandra, you're such a great example of that.
Yeah.
A
There's no
multi-hyphenate.
multi-hyphenate. There's nothing, and it all joins together in a beautiful tapestry.
It really does, doesn't it?
To when I come against someone who doesn't understand that the tapestry is the point, the tapestry is the story
It really
that
is.
that has trouble making that connection. I can only assume that they're not living fully all of their passions. That's a leap, I understand, but it's one that makes sense to me. That yeah.
Well, and just I don't know why this random thought comes to me, but it does. It's never too late. I think
Never.
the author's name was Eudora Welty, who wrote the novel and Ladies of the Club. That was like her first book. She wrote it when she was
Hmm.
82.
Oh my goodness. It's
It's
never
not,
too late. That's
it's not,
fabulous.
it
Grandma
doesn't,
Moses. It's never too late.
right, exactly.
Many,
Connect
many
with that
examples.
passion. Yeah.
Many.
Build
There's
your
nothing like
story.
a third act discovery. Nothing like it.
I agree.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, Paul, thank you so, so much. I'm going to look at some of my closing questions. I'm just going to ask you one.
Oh, okay. Pick a good one.
Yeah. Um, what's one word that defines great leadership?
Curiosity.
Bam! That's my word too.
Yeah.
Yes.
I,
Excellent.
I often tell younger people in the business, you can still be breathing, but be dead from the neck up when you stop learning. One of my hot buttons is people who have no interest in continuing to grow intellectually or emotionally. I've got it all figured out. I don't need to know anything.
Yeah.
I feel
And
sorry for
I'm
people.
uninterested in you as well.
Yes,
It's just breathtaking. Yeah, I'm with you.
isn't it though? Hmm.
That is brilliant. That is the perfect closing of curiosity. And by the way, the connection of curiosity to storytelling is there's no greater word that informs good storytelling.
100%.
Curiosity.
100%.
Okay, Paul. And folks listening in, these are all going to be in the show notes. So if you're driving, don't write them down.
Yeah, please don't.
Yeah, keep your eyes on the road. Um, you can find your book at Amazon, and I'm sure there's a link on your website. What is your website?
The website is vendilli.com. That's spelled V like Victor, ENDILLI.com.
And also on that, there's a place where people can reach out to you to
Absolutely.
if they want to make any kind of contact and have any kind of
LinkedIn as
conversation.
well, Sandra, that works well too. So
And you're
there's,
also on Instagram.
yes,
Yes. Any other social media?
Instagram, Facebook. I'm on TikTok. I don't really post that much on TikTok, but Hey,
Yet.
stay curious.
Yeah,
Got to
yet.
see what everybody's up to out there.
Indeed. Thank you so, so much for being on the edge of every day with us, Paul.
Thanks for having me, Sandra. It's been a great privilege. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And wonderful listeners, remember, the edge is where you come alive. Till we speak again, take good care.
Come on. Hey everyone, thanks again for spending time with us here on the Edge of Everyday. I'm so grateful for your support. Please hit subscribe and follow us. You can find me, Sandra Bargman, across social media. Links are always in the show notes. And please leave us a review at Apple Podcasts. Much gratitude to my inspiring guests. Thank you for sharing your challenges, your reflections, your wit and wisdom. And lastly, many thanks to Magic Thread Media and the executive coaching team at Create Magic at Work. Remember, the edge is where you come alive. The edge of every day.
Pressure pushing down on me, pressing down on you, no man has fall under pressure.
Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to a Magic Thread Media podcast.